So we meet each other once again with our seventh passage of the series, and my goal today is actually to test you using speed. So normally in a live class I can time you when you go ahead and read a passage, solve a question, but then today I won't be able to do that. I won't be able to time you since it's not live, you're watching a recording. But then please make sure that you do not spend more than, I'd say, 25 seconds per slide on an average when it comes to reading the passage. So as usual, we are working on a passage. This is going to be the seventh one of the series. I am Vikrant, your personal coach for all things related to VARC, communication skills and mental aspects of the preparation. So let's dive into the passage. As usual, you will read it first, answer the questions, and then we solve it together. So here you go. Hit pause and then answer this. And then read this, sorry. Okay, next. 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 Okay, so that takes care of your passage, and let us dive into the questions now, starting with the first one. So pause, answer, and then come back. Next. So please pause, answer, and then come back. Okay, hope you've answered this. Here is the next one. All right, and taking you over to the last question now. All right, so now that you're done with all the 4 questions along with the passage, let's go ahead and read it together in order to work on it. So let's start. Emily Durkheim, the first person to be formally recognized as a sociologist and the most scientific of the pioneers, conducted a study that stands as a research model for sociologists today. So we know about this particular branch, right? Sociology. And we say this person was the first one to be recognized as a sociologist. On top of that, he was the most scientific of the pioneers. So, when it comes to science, there is a particular method where you look at a hypothesis, then you figure out how to test that hypothesis using empirical data. And then if the data supports it, great. If it does not support, you design another hypothesis, another experiment. So basically focusing a lot on observations, empirical data, hypothesis, etc. So basically using that method. So he conducted a study that stands as a research model for sociologists today. Okay, so what was the study? His investigation of suicide was in fact the first sociological study to use statistics. Interesting. So in Suicide, 1964, originally published in 1897, Durkheim documented his contention. So his contention was his notion, his idea, his hypothesis, so to say, that some aspects of human behavior, even something as allegedly individualistic as suicide. See, suicide is mostly done alone. I mean, there are times when I've heard of suicide pacts or mass suicides by some led by some cult leaders, but mostly it is a decision and an action that is taken by one individual alone. And Durkheim is saying that even something as individualistic as suicide can be explained without reference to individuals. That's interesting. So how is this coming about? So like all of Durkheim's work, suicide must be viewed within the context of his concern for social integration. So look at this. So this also tells us that all of Durkheim's work was somehow connected to social integration. So social integration is how closely you have become a part of the society. So, there are people who are aloof and then there are people who are very well integrated. So, Durkheim wanted to see if suicide rates within a social entity, and social entity can be any group, a group, organization, society. So, suicide rates within a social entity are related to the degree to which individuals are socially involved. Where you notice even the definition, involved here means integrated and regulated. So, you have both of these things there. And regulated obviously would mean when you regulate something, you sort of control it, right? Remember, we have these regulators for fan, we have regulators on our gas stove. So this in a way says how significant is the influence of society on your behavior, on your actions. So Durkheim describes 3 types of suicides: egoistic, anomic, and altruistic. Egoistic suicide is promoted when individuals do not have sufficient social ties. Since single adults, and single here means never married, not somebody who got married and is divorced, etc. is talking about single adults, for example, are not heavily involved with the family life. They are more likely to commit suicide than are married adults. Okay. Altruistic suicide, on the other hand, is more likely to occur when social integration is too strong. Ooh. So, I mean, we can look at this word and its meaning, but then considering that they are being used in a very specific way here, let's go by what the author says. Okay, so there are suicides which are a result of integration which is too strong. For example, the ritual suicide of Hindu widows on their husband's funeral pyre is one example. So Sati Pratha, if you remember. Military personnel trained to lay down their lives for their country provide another illustration. So in these cases, you're dying because you're too involved. So be it dying on the funeral pyre with your dead husband or laying down your life by a military personnel. Then next, Durkheim's third type of suicide, anomic suicide, increases when the social regulation of individual is disrupted. So notice this time around we are not talking about integration. So this social involvement had 2 parts. In this case we are talking about just one of the parts. When social regulation is disrupted, for example, suicide rates increase during economic depressions. People who suddenly find themselves without a job or without hope of finding one are more prone to kill themselves. Suicides may also increase during periods of prosperity. People may loosen their social ties by taking new jobs, moving to new communities, or finding new mates. Is that connected with period of prosperity? I don't know. Period of prosperity leads to people taking new jobs, moving to new communities. I don't know. Maybe. And then, using data from the government population reports of several countries, much of it from the French government statistical office, Durkheim found strong support for his line of reasoning. Suicide rates were higher among single then married people, among military personnel then civilians, among divorced then married people, and among people involved in nationwide economic crises. So he's saying that, okay, he came up with some hypothesis, even the data goes on to support it. It is important to realize that Durkheim's primary interest was not in the empirical indicators. So empirical indicators are basically observations. So his interest was not in the observations he used, such as suicide rates among this, that, and that. Rather, Durkheim used the following indicators to support several of his contentions. So what are those indicators? Social behavior can be explained by social rather than psychological factors, where remember, psychological factors are specific to one individual. Mostly, although you can have groupthink, etc. and some other factors. Second, suicide is affected by the degree of integration and regulation within social entities. And third, since society can be studied scientifically, sociology is worthy of recognition in the academic world. Durkheim was successful on all 3 counts. No wonder he became known as the first sociologist. So let's dive into our questions. So first one, in his study of suicide, Durkheim's main purpose was So this main purpose was actually hinted at a couple of places. So in the first paragraph, I saw this, that even something like suicide can be explained without reference to individuals, and the rest of the paragraph says that we can explain it using social integration and regulation. And that was again mentioned in the last paragraph rather explicitly. So we are looking for an answer choice that tells us that suicide is not an individual act, but an act which is performed within certain societal conditions, integration and regulation. So his main purpose was to document that suicide can be explained without reference to the individual. Very straightforward, mentioned in the first paragraph, should be true. B, to provide an explanation of the variation in the rate of suicide across societies. The variation in the rate of suicide across societies has not even been discussed in the passage. So something that is not even being discussed cannot be the main purpose. Let's rule it out. C, to categorize various types of suicides. Yes, he did get into the categorization, which talked about the different motivations or the different factors, but then can that be termed the main purpose? And had categorization been the main purpose, those other things, the first and the last paragraph, then will become meaningless in the context of this as a main idea. D, to document that social behavior can be explained by social rather than psychological factors. This is a little too broad. We're not talking about entirety of social behavior in a large chunk of the passage, and therefore A will still be more suitable than D, and thus we should go ahead and mark A as our answer. Let's dive into our next question now. Single adults not heavily involved with family life are more likely to commit suicide. Durkheim categorized this as. So single adults committing suicide, this is more or less a straightforward question, right? This was called egoistic suicide, and therefore our answer here should be option C. So specific detail, now you may look at it and you'd say, sir, this is easy, but then yes, even CAT gives you easy passages in between. You don't believe me? Look at this passage. It is an actual CAT passage, by the way. So here is the third one. According to Durkheim, suicide rates within a social entity can be explained in terms of what? Absence of social ties, disruption of social regulation, nature of social integration. So if we look at it, notice the second paragraph talks about not possessing sufficient social ties and ties which are too strong. Then the third paragraph talks about disruption in social regulation. If you combine these things, you'd very clearly be able to see that A and B are very clearly mentioned. Then if A and B are mentioned, then you start thinking of C. Is C their nature of social integration? Yes. How closely you are integrated and or not. So it can still be inferred, and therefore the best answer for question 3 must be option D. Then question 4. So question number 4, basing himself on his own indicators, Durkheim was right on some counts and not others, vindicated on all counts, wrong but did not realize that he was right, substantially correct but formally wrong. So I think the first thing that we need to figure out is, the first thing that we need to check is where are his own indicators mentioned? Well, that was mentioned in the last paragraph. You notice Durkheim used the following indicators to support several of his contentions. So these are his own indicators, 1, 2 and 3, and the passage very clearly tells us Durkheim was successful on all 3 counts, and therefore when we look at these answer choices, we can say that he was vindicated on all 3 counts. So if somebody is vindicated, it means that he was proven right, where initially people were skeptical of his claims. Initially people may have thought that he was wrong, but then he eventually turned out to be right. Vindicated also has this another meaning where somebody turns out to be innocent when initially people blamed. But in this case, I think considering that the passage very explicitly mentions 3 indicators and goes on to say that he was right on all 3, we should have no hesitation in choosing B. And before I move out, I would like to leave you with this thought. If you are working on something that you really care about, you do not have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. So just check if that is happening with you. If not, then maybe it is the vision that you need to clarify. That will go on to support you. So that's it from me in this particular session. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep having fun and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.